good afternoon again. We had an express pause of 2 minutes. Thank you for being that flexible. And now I would like to welcome you to our panel discussion on interpersonal trust and how it grows within and between us. We will talk today and this afternoon about the significance of trust in interpersonal human relationships, the impact of self-esteem, and the connections between courage, risk, and vulnerability. The last one, a concept that we just heard about in the lecture from Professor Anne Böckler-Rettich. And my name is Katja Kessing, and I am happy that 3 very interesting speakers from different professional and cultural backgrounds accepted our invitation for this panel. And let me briefly introduce to you our estimated panelists. To my right, I have Sondos Shabayek. She's an Egyptian filmmaker, an acting coach, and an intimacy coordinator. And she has over 12 years of experience working with actors and non-actors. She directs, amongst other formats, storytelling workshops and theater performances of women and gender-based stories. And Sondos' work is dedicated to exploring authentically telling stories of herself and other women and being part of a truthful and honest representation of the lives of women on screen. A warm welcome for you. And I forgot to say that she's now based in Berlin, so you didn't have such a long way. But Yu Niiya, a warm welcome to you. You had a much longer way from Japan. Yu Niiya is Professor of Psychology at the Department of Global and Interdisciplinary Studies at Hosei University in Tokyo. She received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Michigan and has been a principal investigator for the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Her research lies in the exploration of whether a compassionate mindset can encourage people to overcome their hesitation to take interpersonal risks. And she's also investigating about how to compare psychological concepts in different cultural backgrounds. Again, a warm welcome to you, and thank you for having made your way from Japan. And of course, last but not least, over there, Professor Dr. Martin Hartmann. He was appointed to the chair of practical philosophy by the University of Lucerne in Switzerland in February 2011. And from 2020 onwards, he has been the dean of the Faculty of Cultural and Social Sciences in Lucerne. He studied philosophy, comparative literature, and sociology at the University of Constance, the London School of Economics, and the Freie Universität in Berlin. He has more or less 20 years of research on the concept of trust, so you're a high expert in this topic. For example, in 2011, you published a very meaningful book on the practice of trust, and the latest book came out in March 2020, which is called Trust, the Invisible Power. So also for you, welcome, and we are happy to have you all here for this discussion. Let me just tell you that we have a short... Yes, please. So let me just let you know, we start here with a little discussion on stage, and later onwards we will also give over the mic to you to raise your questions. So I would like to start maybe because you come from 3 disciplines, from 3 different cultural backgrounds, so it's a huge topic that we talk about. I would like to ask you something in general before we start with respective questions to each of you. So what would you say according to your discipline, which is philosophy, psychology, arts? What is the key factor or even the key factors for trust so that trust can really flourish in interpersonal relationships? Maybe it's not possible to answer it fully, but maybe you would like to start? Is it?
I don't.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, it's on. For me, trust has always been a very important concept because my work in theater depended solely on my ability to create spaces of trust where women and sometimes groups of men can come into the space and share stories that they haven't shared before. So without trust, this cannot happen. So for many, many years, trust was something that I would divide up into certain elements. So for example, where we used to meet needs to be a place that they could trust. So if it's a public place, this is not possible. It needs to be a place without exposed glass windows. It needs to be a place where the sound doesn't travel, so people outside the room cannot hear us. So trust was very specific. And with each and every group, time was dedicated to define what trust meant, because what trust means for me might mean something else for someone else. So we would define what trust means, and we would then make certain agreements on that trust. And the agreements consisted of things that I would suggest into the space, and then I would open up the space and ask them, what else would make you feel like you can trust and open up? So this was how I used to work when it was with theater, and then later on with actors. Those of you who are familiar with the profession of acting, actors need to put themselves out there and be vulnerable and open up. And for this to happen, they need to trust me. They need to trust me not to abuse that. They need to trust that I will not use my power, because there is power dynamics, and I think this has been spoken about. There's very strong power dynamics when it comes to trust. So again, without that trust, this actor or this actress wouldn't be able to connect to their vulnerability and give the brilliant performances that they're able to do. So that's like, in a short...
One of the key factors, not misusing the power. So, Yu, what would you say, according to your psychological perspective? What is really, or what are the key factors that contribute to the growth of trust in interpersonal relationships?
I'm very glad to hear the previous talk by Anne, because I think I completely resonate with what you proposed. So in trust, when thinking about trust, we're thinking whether this person is trustworthy, whether I can trust this person. And so you're looking for signs in the person that, so that you know whether the person is going to be good to you or will be doing something good for you. But when you're looking for those signs, I think there are two problems in building a trustful relationship. One is that you don't really have you don't have control over who you can trust. It's really dependent on the person, up to the person, whether or not he or she can show signs of trust. The other problem is in interpersonal relationships, if both parties are waiting for the other person to show signs of trust, then it's going to take a long time before you can build that relationship. And so when people want others to prove you that they are trustworthy, I don't think it would work. And so what's needed instead, I think, is a shift in our mindset. Instead of thinking whether the person is going to be good for me, there needs to be a shift in thinking whether I want to be good to this person, whether I care about this person's well-being. And I think that's what I mean by compassion in my work. When you want to make a difference in someone's life and make a contribution to that person's well-being, then the question is more of, do I want to trust this person? Whether instead of, does this person is worthy of my trust? And then I think you have a lot of control over who you want to trust and under what conditions and what timing. And so you can actually build a trustful relationship rather than just having to rely on the other person. And so I would say the most important factor in building trust would be compassion. And I think that nicely resonates the previous talk about kindness meditation, loving kindness meditation. I think that's going to be a key factor.
Yeah, so not misusing power, compassion. Martin Hartmann, what would you say? What is or what are the key factors?
Well, philosophers have given a rather boring answer to the question of what leads to trust. It's the experience of honesty, truthfulness, or just to have the ability or the chance to meet a person over a certain span of time. Trust needs time to develop, and experience this person's good character, let's put it that way, or benevolence, as someone called it this morning. Some philosophers would add in more or less egalitarian contexts, because, as you said, in many social situations we are confronted by power differentials, by inequality, and that does have an impact, of course, on trust. Nowadays, philosophers have been a bit worried about people like Trump, for example, because Trump, as we all know, I guess, is not a very honest person, is not very truthful, and yet quite a lot of people seem to trust Donald Trump. So what kind of trust is that? I mean, we might call it wrong trust or illegitimate trust, but it seems to be there. So some people have begun to think about the factor of values. So nowadays, some philosophers, including perhaps to some extent myself, would say it's the illusion of shared values that leads you to trust someone. By that I mean, well, you even accept someone who lies to you or to others if you think that this kind of lying makes sense, let's say in a political context. If he does so for your party or your party line or to support your worldview. So the old answer, in some sense, gets a bit confused, right? Because here's someone not trustworthy according to our measures at all, yet receiving quite a lot of, let's say, political trust. So it's quite complicated. So last word on that, Corona has also shown, I think, to many scientists, in fact, that just telling people the truth, or let's say, this is the state of the art in vaccination, does not seem to be enough to get people to vaccinate. So there also the factor of values came in. Evidently, some people don't share the values that scientists, or many scientists, share, so they didn't trust. They didn't trust the whole system of science. So people can say whatever they want. It can be as truthful and as maybe as true or as honest as possible. That does not lead automatically to trust. So I think the whole discussion in my discipline has been somewhat, has gotten a lot more complex and a bit confused, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. So we start with the confusion, which is always good for a discussion. I would like to come back to you, Sondos, and to ask you something. You work as a filmmaker, as a theater director, and also as an acting coach. So what role does trust play in your work, which is also quite connected to the body, not just to words? Is there any difference?
It's very connected. Usually when I start work, when I used to do the storytelling workshops, and now when I work with actors, usually trust for me is something that's created in the space, and it's very defined. And the kind of trust that I invite the actors or the workshop participants to trust is not the kind of trust that I suggest that they go and use outside. Like, for example, if I say, this is a space where you can express your emotions, where you can cry whenever you cry, I tell them, I'm not suggesting you go and do that in the bus stop. I'm not suggesting you do that on the street. I'm suggesting you explore doing that right now in this space. And the way we do that, other than the agreements that I've just spoken about, agreements like whatever happens in this room stays in this room, we don't comment on each other, we don't make facial expressions when someone says something, like the few agreements that help us feel, okay, we can be whoever we like to be. There are a lot of exercises using our body to enhance trust. And one of them is actually, I mean, they're very similar to the performance we saw yesterday, and then again, one of the trust games today, where there's a circle of people and they're holding hands in order to support each other from falling. So one of the trust exercises is literally allowing yourself to fall and someone at the back supporting you. So they go through the experience of allowing their body to feel trust. The other thing that we do that's very much connected to trust is consent and boundaries. Because for me to be able to trust, I need to know that I have the right to say yes, and I need to know that my boundaries will be respected. So we always do that. And I don't just do it with intimacy coordination, but I also do it with actors. I do the traffic light system, which means we don't have to have an intimate scene for us to learn where it's okay to touch each other. So I tell them, okay, today, how do you feel about your body? Where is it okay for you to be touched, and where is it not okay, and where is it maybe? And this changes with every person you work with, and also changes from one day to the other. So this is mainly...
yeah. And may I maybe just ask, you also worked with women who have experienced the Arab Spring and who told you their stories. Was there especially difficult situation in creating trust with them, because it was also dangerous to talk about it, I guess?
I'll tell you something that's a bit unexpected. I always have a harder time with men than with women. Women are more, from my experience, are more willing to be vulnerable and to open up than men. At least in Egypt, because, and especially when it comes to gender-based stories. Because there's this stereotype of a man, men don't cry, they don't talk about their emotions, they don't talk about, I don't know, this and that. Women are more open and willing to do so. In regards to when I collected stories from the Arab Spring, no, there was this euphoria of expression and freedom of expression, so everyone was sharing all the time. This wouldn't happen today, but back then it was very easy.
Yeah. And if we talk about vulnerability and also about taking risks, I would like to ask you, it's often said that once trust is broken, it can never be repaired. So what would you say? Do you agree as a psychologist, or what can one do to get it repaired?
Well, when someone betrays your trust, it's not easy to repair it, especially if you're feeling hurt and you're angry about it and you have all those negative emotions, then it's impossible to repair trust at that moment. But I think because if you think of trust as originating from you, once your negative emotions comes down, then I think it's possible for you to want to wish good for the person. And if you have that motivation, if you can feel compassion toward the person, then I think there's always a second chance, or maybe a third chance. And I think someone mentioned earlier about forgiveness. I think it was Anne again. But with forgiveness, I think it's possible to restart with the trust. But I also think it's not an easy thing, because when trust is betrayed, it's easier for you to say that this person who betrayed you is 100% responsible. And it's easy to blame the person betrayed because he or she is a jerk or a psychopath. But usually, most of the time, the reason why the person betrayed is not 100% the person's fault. There's within an interaction, it's always the influence is always mutual, and so there is always something that you did that could have caused the person to want to betray you in return. And so when you can take a little bit of perspectives on why it all happened, and then when you can feel a bit responsible for the betrayal, I think you would regain control over what happened. If you're responsible for what happened, it's something that you could repair. And with that, I believe you could reduce your negative emotions or your anger or your hurt feelings toward this person and be able to understand the situation or understand the person a little more. Again, it's not going to be easy, but I think it's possible.
Yeah. And would you say, from your experience with the work for the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, that this concept of being able to repair distrust is something global, or is there maybe other cultural factors that are maybe different all along the globe?
With the Japanese, I think they're a lot more cautious in first building trust with a stranger. There is a very tight network of in-group members with whom they're going to have very trustful, strong ties. But outside that network, close network, people are being a lot more careful about trusting them. The Japanese are very polite towards strangers, and so they would be always nice to others, but that's not exactly the same as trusting these people. I think those polite behaviors, these nice gestures that they do to strangers, it's more not a sign of compassion and wanting good for you, but it's more like a self-defense. If you maintain these cultural norms of being polite, there's no way they can harm us, harm me, and so it's very self-defensive and not really a trust. And so when there is a trust betrayal among those outgroups, I don't think it would cause too much harm to the Japanese because they haven't really trusted them in the first place. And so in that case, I would see cultural differences perhaps. When the trust betrayal happens in a very close relationship, then I think it's going to happen in a very similar way across cultures.
Thank you. So talking about betrayal, distrust, taking risks, Martin, what would you say? Your research goes among the idea of connecting the concepts of vulnerability, of risks, and also of courage. Can you maybe, you said you want to resume it in 1 minute, but it's your the core of your research, but maybe you can explain us a little bit the intersection of these three concepts and how they belong together.
I'll try 30 seconds maybe. I would just like to add, if I may, I mean, sometimes if trust is betrayed, maybe there is no need to even rebuild it. I mean, if someone betrays you time and again, well, you better leave this person, if possible, right? If possible. So I think the first thing sometimes to clarify is this worth it? Is it really worth it? So trust is not always good in itself. It depends on the quality of the relationship in all its complexity. That was just an add-on. And then the second add-on maybe, I mean, if someone betrays your trust, there's something you learn about this other person, something very hurtful, but of course at the same time you learn something about yourself, and maybe that is even more hurtful, namely that you were wrong in assessing or judging this person, who maybe in close relationship you seem to have known very well, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I did not know this person as well as I thought. And that can be quite shocking because it attacks your ability to judge other people's trustworthiness. And I think that is also something that you have to work on. So it's not only related to the other person, but also to yourself, the work that you may have to do if you want to rebuild a relationship, if you think it's worth it. So that was just the addition. What is interesting for me when you talk about vulnerability and trust is what I sometimes call the trust-specific kinds of vulnerability. We are vulnerable in many, many respects. I mean, a lot can happen to us every day and any second, but not all of these risks have to do with trust. So sometimes, you know, when you say trust is risky, people broaden this perspective and say, well, as is life, you know. But what I'm interested in as a philosopher, I'm not a psychologist, I have to say, is what kind of vulnerabilities you enter in trust relationships, and they are quite specific. It's not the same as, you know, the branch of a tree falling on your head, which sometimes happens, unfortunately. That's not because of trust. That's just because of, I don't know, fate, or just, you know, shit happens, as we say. So trust-specific vulnerability has its own dimensions, its specific qualities, and as we now mentioned several times, they can, if it happens that trust is betrayed, if someone lets us down, It hurts. It's a moral scandal to some extent, more than if we just rely on a person. Sometimes I distinguish reliance from trust. It makes sense, I think, in some contexts to distinguish. When we trust someone, a lot more is at stake in moral terms. We are deeply, troubled by someone who betrays, let's say, an important secret that we offered the person. So we think it shouldn't happen. That's the moral aspect of it. But at the same time, we don't think that trustworthiness is a duty, as we sometimes distinguish in philosophy, strong or strict duties from lesser strong, because that is what trust is about. We leave some space for the person we trust in. We don't want to control. We don't want to check. We don't want to follow after. So that's the risk. That's what is risky about trust, that we, in a way, leave the person free to choose, to some extent, how to fulfill our trust. Trust is not a contract, We don't sign a contract saying, you do this, and then I do that. So it's inherent in trust that we call it discretionary spaces are opened up by trust. And that's something that some people don't like, my last remark here, because they don't want to be vulnerable. And it's exactly this freedom that we grant through trust that some people are afraid of. And so these people may be the ones who stay at home or don't look for friends or don't find partners, whatever.
I think you wanted to
could I jump in? I completely agree with what you're saying, because I think we often put trusting, if you trust someone, become vulnerable to the person, but I don't think it's always true. When you want to do something good for the person, and that's the beginning of all trust, you become vulnerable because you're expecting reciprocity. You want the other person to like you in return. But if you just wish good for the person without expecting reciprocity, there is no disappointment, there is no betrayal. And the image that I really like is when you put a big bait for fishing, so you fish, but the fish just takes the baits without giving you anything in return. You're upset, you're angry. But when you're just feeding the fish, then you're just happy feeding the fish, and there is no disappointment, there is no anger, there is no betrayal involved. And so, in that sense, when you're trying to build trust that way, I don't think it would always come with vulnerability.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe before we open the questions also to the public, I would like to ask you one more question. Sondos, you just said in your daily work you experience that women are much more open to trust and also maybe to be trustworthy. I don't know if you said also this or if this is my interpretation. And I would like to ask all of you what you feel, if this is maybe something gender-based. And also I would like to extend the question later to Martin, who in our pre-talk talked about the concept of trust, which has quite feminist roots, you said. So maybe...
There are two things, I think. I think we spoke about self-confidence.
Yes.
And now you're bringing up trust. And again, this is just from my experience, so I can't generalize. I always feel with a lot of women, self-confidence is an issue, but they are able to trust more. And again, I can debate that just philosophically and based on my experience and say they have a bigger need to trust. Mm-hmm. Because with trust comes your ability to also receive support. And again, I'm speaking in the context of my work. For example, when a woman comes and she has a story of how she's been abused by her husband, she has a need for support. And so in order to be able to use that space available for her to share her story, she needs the trust. And so I feel she is on some level aware of that point. So even if she doesn't feel so confident, this does not necessarily contradict trust. And I feel it's the opposite sometimes with men. They are confident, and sometimes their confidence gives them the impression that they shouldn't trust because they don't need it. Which in a way, maybe that's not confidence, that's more of ego.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are my 2 cents about that.
Yeah. Martin, could I hand over to you what we spoke about before?
Thank you. I mean, this is interesting about philosophy. The topic of trust was introduced to philosophy by feminist philosophers. Anne Bayer, for example, not much known, a very great New Zealand-based philosopher, no longer alive, unfortunately. She wrote important papers on trust in the context of moral philosophy, saying, well, you male philosophers, who most moral philosophers up to the point had been male, you care about duty, moral duties, or reciprocity-based morality. What about all those relationships that we lead, like between highly unequal persons, like parents and babies, that we mentioned earlier on in the talk, in the talk just before this one, this session? Shouldn't we say that these kinds of relationships also generate quite a lot of important moral abilities in the positive case that it does happen, that are important or should be important for moral philosophy, not just duty, strict duties or whatever. And so the whole question of care, the ethics of care, was also developed by feminist philosophers against certain conceptions of male-based moral philosophy. And that is interesting because now in philosophy, trust is a massive topic, as in other disciplines. But the feminist background is ignored. It's as usual. It's forgotten that it was mostly women in the 80s and 90s, not so long ago, who introduced trust as a topic. So maybe that is something that is typical of certain scientific developments, that some of the great female figures are forgotten or ignored to some extent once the topic is big enough for men to catch on, as it were, and for other genders, I should say, nowadays. So this is really interesting in itself, but again, it's not totally negative, because it is good in the end if more people talk about the topic, as we do here in a very diverse manner, and break up, just closed-in circles. So that is, I think, quite interesting from a disciplinary perspective.
Mm-hmm. So my timekeeper has gone. She's there. So I think we could maybe open the first round of questions from the public, because I guess you might have some questions for the three speakers here on the panel. If you want to raise a question, please just raise your hand, and we will hand you over the mic. I think over there is the first question.
Hello, my name is Andrea. I'm a sociologist. Thank you all for the insights. My question goes towards the relationship of trust and authenticity, the way how we perform. Actually, what is the way how we play on stage in terms of communication with the others and the other person or a group of people? Because what is interesting to follow, when we were talking, I think that Martin was talking specifically about Trump and the way how he's able actually to get a support. And despite the fact-checking, some people can conceive him as a trustful person because of the performative action of that performance of authenticity that is often misinterpreted as a trustful action. So what is the performative element in our recognition or our kind of investment or conception of someone as a trustful person, and how it relates to authenticity nowadays, when authenticity is such a big word in philosophy, in science.
Thank you. But you should say also something about this acting aspect, maybe, if you want. I mean, because you're closer to that than I am. As to the authenticity, this is interesting. In a way, you are right. Trust may be in a way, Trump is truthful in being a dishonest person, in hating women or whatever. So if you vote for him, but that's what I meant, if you share these values, you may not admit, but then he's the right person, right? So in that sense, you're right, it's a good point. So he's just profiting from something that all politicians, if we just stick to politics for the moment, I think have to face, that authenticity is asked for this is why we have so many scandals in politics, because it's quite difficult actually to fulfill this very close look at your personality and at the question of whether you fulfill what you promise, whether you do what you say. Because of course many politicians fail in doing so, and in that sense you are right. In a very, probably to most of us, perverse way, Trump is extremely honest about at least himself. He's certainly, I don't think he's honest about other people. I think he's lying a lot about other people's interests or wanting to serve other people's interests. That's, by the way, why I said the illusion of shared values. I think in many instances people have the illusion that a person like Trump will fulfill on his promises. Well, so far we know that he didn't, but he did a lot for himself. So this is, I think, authenticity is a tricky thing in politics, I think. It can, I mean, he has obviously managed to succeed in being quite authentic in various ways. Others find it more difficult. Maybe they even don't want to be as authentic as Trump is, because they think, well, politics is not just about authenticity. We should have different, emphasis in politics. But anyway, it does play a very important role. And if he is a good actor or not, maybe you may want to answer that. So,
Sondos.
I think he's definitely very authentic, because we mistake authenticity with something that means it has to be positive, which is not true. Being authentic means being true to yourself. And so as horrific as his speeches were, he was actually giving a voice to all the immorality a lot of other politicians did abide by, but they never voiced it. And that's why I would say he was authentic in that sense. So when we say, okay, authenticity is needed, what we mean isn't you need to be an honest and positive person. Authenticity means I am true to myself in this moment, which means I allow myself to be angry, I allow myself to be jealous, I allow myself this and that, which might not, traits that are not necessarily celebrated, but this is what's true. And in order to be, I don't know, a brilliant actor, we need to be aware of ourselves. We need to be able to access our authentic selves, which means I need to know who I am and how I'm feeling and be able to accept that. For this to happen, I need to trust. Why? Because most of the time, I feel my authentic self is not good enough. I feel my authentic self will be judged and shamed. And so, for it to come forward, for me to feel authentic, I need to allow myself to be authentic. I need to feel self-confident. I mean, just a bit, just a tiny bit of the confidence of Trump would do. And then also, I need to trust that my authenticity will not be shamed. I need to trust I can be angry and no one's going to shame me for it. Yeah.
You also want to give an answer? Yes, please.
Could I add a little bit? In terms of authenticity, when I think people are really good at distinguishing whether or not people are genuinely caring about your well-being or whether they are showing those helpful behavior in order to get something in return. I've examined people who had genuine compassion goals to support others versus people who want to appear likable, appear helpful, and people can distinguish these two types of people. And so the authenticity is captured, is readily recognized by the other person.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the public? Yes, over there. Can you go over there to raise hands? Maybe first you?
Thank you. My name is Isabella. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm wondering, what is the line between trust and faith, especially when it comes to politics, when you have some leaders using religious elements, and sometimes it's mixed trust and faith in this leader, for example. Thank you.
Well, hope was mentioned earlier in the talk. Hope, trust as being hopeful. I sometimes distinguish trust and hope. And I know that in theology, hope is the more common way of approaching trust. And probably because when I think about the reasons for trusting someone, I would say mostly maybe we are not aware of the reasons why we trust someone, but if you ask us, we can sort of mention some. You know, why do you trust this person? I might say, well, he's been quite honest, or he's a truthful person, whatever, or he's supported me in difficult times. So these are reasons why you may trust someone. So in hope, I think, at least in a theological understanding, you jump, or you make this jump that we saw earlier on an image without really having reasons. When you run out of reasons, you hope. So that's my distinction, you know. Caroline Emke, the writer, the well-known German writer, maybe some of you know her, she's written about a visit to a dentist, and he struck her nerve sometime, you know, just with this drilling machine. And then she wanted to just run away, you know, because it was terrible, of course, terrible experience. And then the dentist told her to stay, please stay, you know, I'll try my best next time, and so on. And she said, why should I trust you? I have no reason left. And then evidently this guy said, well, that's exactly what trust is. You know, you have no reasons, but you stay. I would say, I don't know, you know, I'm not sure. I mean, after all, she's still sitting at a dentist's office, you know, and not somewhere else. So in that sense, I think even in this kind of relation, there are some reasons why you prefer to go to a dentist when you have a toothache. So, but that's my distinction. So usually I add a joke about my soccer club that I favor. The club is not doing well. So in German we say, die Hoffnung stirbt zuletzt. I don't know how you translate it into English. Hope is the last thing that dies or something. And this means I have no reason whatsoever to be optimistic, but I still I pretend to be optimistic. No, so that's my distinction between hope and trust. But in theology, this is, of course, what they find interesting, this kind of jumping, willingness to jump, even though you don't have many reasons. So that's what I learned by just talking to people from theology, or from talking to people who believe in God or in a God. My concept of trust is a bit more based on reasons I might be able to offer if asked.
And Martin, may I just interfere, because I read that you also used the concept of reliability, Verlässlichkeit. So this is somehow a level in between trust and hope? In the middle is reliability? Or
well, sometimes, you know, like when a bank wants my trust, I kind of reply, it's enough if you are reliable. Don't ask for my trust. Because mostly, I mean, I do online banking. No, I don't know any single person. This is interpersonal trust, this whole panel. And so why should I trust my online banking system? It's enough for me if the system is reliable, if it does what it's supposed to do. And if it breaks down, I may be disappointed, but not morally disappointed, as we just mentioned earlier on. You know, as happens when my trust is let down by, let's say, another person. And I think from an institutional point of view, I would sometimes make this distinction. And I think trust is so common nowadays. It's such a heavy topic, as we know here. It's sometimes if you pretend to be trustworthy, you may run the risk of offering too much, of offering something you cannot offer. And some companies, companies always want your trust in their publicity, in their marketing strategies. But then my reply would be, are you really sure that you can offer trustworthiness to the people who you want to trust you or to place your trust in you? If not, you run the risk of creating a lot of disappointment. Just be reliable at first, and then maybe I run into a trustworthy person in a bank, and then a certain kind of trust can develop. So I think there is a certain awareness of this in many institutions who try to give their institution like a face. The sociologist Anthony Giddens has this interesting concept of face. Abstract institutions sometimes realize they need a face for people to hook on and to develop a trusting relationship. That means that there is a sort of an awareness of we need this personal dimension, even in very, very abstract and highly anonymous relationships. So that's my answer. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I think there was another question over there in the same corner where there was the question before. So now I see a lot of hands. Please, you can decide who was first. I think we have another 10 minutes.
Hi, my name is Saurabh Bharadwaj, and my question is, actually I'll tell you a scenario. So I'm from the corporate world, and in the last couple of years we have been, especially after Corona, we have been working on a platform or in an environment where we have to work from home. And now the scenario is a little different how we used to work together in one office, where we used to have physical presence, and when we meet the person when we meet another person in person, in office, then we gain their trust more easily. And now, since we are working in a different scenario where we all are working from different locations, how do we have the trust in the other person, or how do we? It's not just related to the corporate world. We are all shifting to different locations away from our families, and also this could be one topic of, I would say, distrust, or how we can gain trust of another person when we are sitting in different locations only through a video conferencing. So this was basically my question.
Yeah, good and important question. Who would like to give an answer?
I mean, I can give a very quick, practical answer, and then leave the big words to them. Because sometimes I get approached to give workshops for corporations, and a question I have is, what kind of trust is needed first? So this is a question. And then the second thing, I like to assume that there's no trust, we create it. So for example, what you're saying means that the communication, the face-to-face communication that used to happen is what created trust. And so what does the face-to-face communication give us? It's a way of finding out about the other person. So what can we alternatively do to find out about each other? One of the, I think, brilliant things about Zoom is the breakout rooms, because it provides, I mean, a simulated, not so, I mean, it's different than real life, but all of a sudden you're alone with someone else and no one else is here and you can hear each other. So a lot of groups and projects and corporates, they decided to do activities using Zoom and breakout rooms in order to connect people to each other. So there needs to be alternative ways of communication in order to make up for the lack of it. Yeah.
Yes, please.
The reason why trust is difficult in an online setting is because you have a very limited amount of information. You just see that person's face and the best side of it, and oftentimes the background is totally different. And so the person shows you what they want to show you, just the best side of them. And when people want to be caring about another person, we need to know what the person needs, or what how to be responsive to the person. But with the limited information, that becomes all impossible. One way Zoom can be superior to face-to-face interaction is when you're showing your dirty room behind you. And that brings you who you are, and you see your daughter crossing the screen. That makes you very personal and shows you the side of yourself that's not shown at the office when you're working face-to-face. And so that's perhaps the only way you could become really personal and build trust.
You would like to add?
Just a short.
Yes, please.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, the sociology of work, which is now studying home office and Zoom and the effects of that on trust, finds that, I mean, home office has many advantages in many respects, but it has drawbacks. And as I understand, one of the drawbacks is that in face-to-face interaction, it's easier for you to recognize. I mean, it's what they call invisible recognition. A lot of the satisfaction that you get from work is not just that your officially recognized work is accepted and is visible, but a lot of, as we all know from our everyday work, a lot of the important psychological work is done in the cafeteria, as it were, right? All these kinds of small talk, how do you respond to someone having a crisis, etc., etc. And this dimension is so difficult to grapple with online, because you don't even, so I don't know. So this is something that I read, that this dimension of invisible recognition, and we all want to be recognized for our work, and for our person in work. This dimension, it seems to me, is much more difficult to grasp or to cover through online communication. So that's, I think, why it should still be important to work face to face, or in an office or wherever, where you can meet and see people and have all these invisible, these not often well recognized invisible kinds of communication and interaction. But that's just what I've been reading, to be honest. But of course, from my own work experience, I would share that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to talk about other challenges of trust when we talk about new technologies like AI, ChatGPTs, and so on. But this would be another panel, and I would better like to invite you to give one or two more questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Thanks for the great talk, and as hope was brought up previously, so I had a following up question. So how can we differentiate hope and loyalty? So as the previous example, when you find no reason to trust in the social club, you still stay with them and have like believe in them that they may win. So how can you differentiate that this is faith or this is actually loyalty, that you found yourself loyal to this system, to this social club? Sense.
Is that put to me?
Yeah, or like we could have a more general discussion about like...
It's a good question. Loyalty can get destructive, wouldn't you say? If you are loyalty is positive in many contexts, but wouldn't you say that, let's say, reasons for loyalty run out, as you say, at some point you have no reason to be loyal, but you stay loyal, then I would say, at least from an outside perspective, loyalty can become dangerous to some extent. As I said earlier on, sometimes you should end your trust. And you should not just go on trusting blindly. So loyalty, I'd say, is ambivalent. It's great to have someone who's loyal to you, say. But I don't think that that should just continue, regardless of who you are, what you do, what changes you undergo. I think loyalty should also at some point end. But I'm not sure. Maybe you have better answers than I have.
Hearing you talk, I was thinking, is that really loyalty, or is this perhaps becoming dependency? Because you're dependent on the product or on that dentist, on that team to give you what you need. And so it's no longer really an active action toward the object. It's more like very passive. You have no other choice, and therefore you stay.
I think that's a good point. And sometimes, of course, loyalty, maybe I should see this in a more positive light. I mean, let's say you have lots of enemies, then it's very helpful to have some loyal friends who trust you, I guess. No, I mean, it's important. In some contexts, it's important not to be alone or to be completely isolated. And of course, sometimes you need people who are loyal. But I'd say I'd prefer if this loyalty is sort of well justified. But you might be right. The distinction between being loyal to and being dependent on someone may be tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have come to an end. I'm very sorry, but I guess you will have the opportunity to meet the three speakers during the day and the evening time, maybe to ask them more questions. I would maybe like to pose a very last question to the three of you, and maybe it is my question, what would you say, how can one have a good balance between trust and vulnerability in order really to to be resilient? No, I'm not talking about resilience, because we know Martin Hartmann has something against the concept of resilience. But what would you say? What is a good balance between these 2 points? And if so, I would love to hear also your critics on the topic of resilience.
See how she did it. She brought up the topic saying, oh, we are not going to talk about resilience. No, because I hate the concept of resilience. And if I ever were to favor some kind of cancel culture, can I suggest that we cancel the word resilience, let's say for 10 years from our vocabulary, and see if the world gets any worse? Why do I not like resilience? Can I finish that remark?
Of course.
I think it's so reductive. I mean, it suggests that if your environment is somewhat harsh and challenging, you have to become more resilient. Well, my suggestion will be, well, try to change the environment that is so harsh, and not just yourself. Do not just become more resilient. So resilience, to my mind, is the last neoliberal fashion. It's so powerful. Everyone talks about resilience these days. Let's drop it for 10 days. Don't tell anybody that I suggested to cancel this, because then I'm a proponent of cancel culture. But let's see, in 10 years, we discuss again and see if we lost something from the world of trying to understand ourselves and the world. So that's the resilience thing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say this.
That was the idea. I don't
know how to relate this to your question.
What is the balance between vulnerability and trust?
See, that's the point. Maybe I could add, resilience may even be I mean, vulnerability means being vulnerable. That is open to the trust being disappointed. In trusting someone, you refrain from controlling. So that means that makes you vulnerable. In wanting to be more resilient, I think you don't want to be vulnerable. So it is a good question after all. You're trying to be, harder or stronger or, better prepared to cope with all kinds of challenges. That's not what vulnerability means. So in that sense, maybe the success of the term resilience is exactly a sign of our running away from trust. This is part of my book, that we, on the one, I said this yesterday, so I can repeat it. On the one hand, we mistrust, we think trust is important, but we do a lot not to actually trust. And maybe this is speculation, resilience is one strategy to not have to trust.
Mm-hmm. One very last short word from the two of you, if you want to. What is your advice to find a good balance between vulnerability and trust?
Well, I feel that they're connected. I'm able to be vulnerable when I trust, but I always tell the actors, you need to pick the places where you allow yourself to trust and be vulnerable. Don't just go anywhere. We need to actually choose to trust and choose where and with whom to be vulnerable.
Thank you.
And so just one word, in order for you to be able to be vulnerable, what we need is not just compassion, but also self-compassion. You have to be able to accept your mistake and understand that you're just a human being. And then so self-compassion, compassion would go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, thank you for this last conclusion. Before you all leave, I have to first make an announcement. The next events this afternoon will not take place here on the festival grounds. We will move to other locations in the city of Weimar. My colleagues will be happy to guide you to the respective venues and will wait for you outside at the end of the coffee break at 3:50. That's 10 minutes to 4. And to find your destination, you have to follow the balloon of your choice. If you want to join the discussion Voices of Change, please follow the balloon to the Bauhaus University. If you want to be part of the Trust Lab or the workshop The New Me at the Bauhaus Museum, please follow the respective balloon of Bauhaus Museum. And if you want to see the exhibition, you know that you're human, please follow the balloon to Galerie Eigenheim. And the balloons start at 3:50. And now everybody has heard this announcement. And now I really want to thank you for this interesting, thoughtful talk.
Thank you.
And hope to see you all later and tonight. Thank you so much.